Good morning. Welcome to the VRS Community Partnerships and VRS Staff Forum. I'm Kim Babine, the Director of Community Partnerships for Vocational Rehabilitation Services. For today's agenda, it is all contracts all day. We have new contracts that are going to be executed for July 1, all current contracts with our community partners, and June 30th of this year. So we're getting towards the end here. I want to give you an update on changes that are happening as part of those contract changes. So the community partnerships team at VRS will be going through changes today. So you'll hear from Janine Oyen, Jess Othwaite, Ann Paulson, Sarah Sundin. Janine Oyen will moderate our question and answer period. So again, feel free to send questions via that form at any time, and then we'll wrap up by noon. So the first thing we want to go through is some specifics on the RFP for July 1 contracts. The request for proposals for contracts, that's the way we need to do things for our contract process, was posted on we're going for July 1. It was posted on April 18th. And on the next slide, there is a link to the page where all the information about the RFP is posted. It's posted not on our VRS community partners site that you might be used to. Deed has a page for all open contract RFPs. So that's where all that information lives. You can refer to that. So most community partners that have worked with us in the past have submitted proposals in response to that RFP. And that's really important because all organizations that wish to be considered for a contract starting July 1st must submit a proposal in response to the request for proposals. So that means you, that means everyone. The request for proposals and the proposal response process is for all community partners, not simply new providers. So the process is the same if you're brand new, if you haven't worked with VRS before, and if you've worked with VRS for a long time. So the flip side of that is that if a community partner does not submit a new proposal, that partner's contract will end June 30th. That's the expiration date on your contract, and VRS will not be able to authorize for services starting July 1. This results in a break in service or a gap for individuals. So if you're serving someone come June 30th, you're not going to be able to serve them on July 1. So it's something that's really important that we do in a timely fashion here. All right. So the deadline that we set when we published in April was that if you want to be sure that you have a July 1st start date, proposals were due on May 23rd. If you miss the deadline, don't just sit there. Go ahead and submit your proposal ASAP, because again, the biggest thing is we want to prevent any breaks in services to individuals. It's all about making sure our services reach the individuals who need it when they need it. So because even though we set a deadline, the proposal, the RFP, is an open RFP, which means you can submit it anytime. But if you didn't submit by May 23rd, just because of the volume, we're not sure that you'll have a July 1 start date, but we'll work as hard as we can to try and get you that July 1 start date. An important part of the process after you submit your proposal and all of the documents that you need to submit, the community partnerships team, program specialist, Ann, Jess, Janine, and Sarah, those names that I listed earlier, they are your contract liaison. And so if you've submitted your application, the next step is, after we do a review and evaluation, if you're selected to move to the negotiation stage, is you schedule a consult with your program specialist liaison. And it's imperative that you schedule that consult ASAP if you haven't already, in order to, again, ensure that July 1 start date. Doesn't do us any good to have an application sitting there if we can't move forward on it. So if you haven't scheduled your consult, be in touch with your contract liaison and make sure you get that scheduled as soon as possible. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Jess, who's going to talk about COVID policy.
Good morning, everyone. So we do have an update on the COVID testing and vaccination policy, policy number 1446. As of May 24th, 2022, the state of Minnesota's policy 1446, the proof of vaccination and testing, is no longer in effect. We appreciate your assistance in fulfilling the obligation under this policy while it was in effect. Please note that continued monitoring of the pandemic is ongoing, and updates to policies and changes related to contract requirements may occur in the future. For existing contracts, due to the repeal of policy 1446, any clause in your current contract regarding the policy is negated and will not be enforced. This change is effective beginning May 24th, 2022. This means that community partners will no longer need to attest to compliance with policy 1446 in their applications. The sample contract language is also being amended to remove this language, and responders approved for contracts will not see the COVID policy language in their draft contracts. And Kim, I think I pass it back to you for a little bit, right?
Yes, thanks, Jess.
Perfect, thank you.
Just got the spotlights there. This is Kim. We're going to talk a little bit about on-the-job work and training options. And so, as we mentioned at our last forum, we are working on the job work and training options. We wanted to look at all the services that we have under this umbrella, and we've made some changes that we want to share with you. So for the purposes of what you see in the PowerPoint itself, we use the acronym OJWT for on the job work and training options. So I'll try and spell that out when I'm reading through, but it just made the slides clunky not to use the abbreviation. So when we talk about on the job work and training options, these are the services that we're talking about. We receive feedback. We know that the contracted service rate of $18 for the internship was not reasonably covering a provider's cost to both provide services and reimburse wages. So when we wanted to look at that to look at that service, we wanted to look at the whole umbrella of on-the-job work and training options to make sure they all made sense and made sense in relation to each other. So after review, we've made updates to the reimbursement structure for all on-the-job work and training options, because we want to increase the availability of the services for our folks. So there's more training to come for both internal VRS staff and for our community partners. I'm just going to breeze through these services, but for community partners, we'll be going into more detail in a training this summer on each of these services. And for VRS staff, there will be some policy and policy guidance changes that are being fine-tuned right now by Policy Core and will be rolled out this summer. All right, so the first change is how we pay when VRS pays the wages of an individual in an on-the-job work and training experience. So for general services, on-the-job work and training options, sometimes an individual has their wages paid through the VR program. The state of Minnesota, we can't be the payroll agent for an individual's wages. We've looked into it, we've tried, we're not able to. So we rely on community partners who are willing to serve as the payroll agent, and will reimburse community partners for the cost of those wages and also reimburse for the cost of administrative expenses relating to being that payroll agent. So just a little bit more about what that payroll agent piece is. When a community partner is a payroll agent, the community partner is not just responsible for cutting a check for the individual's wages. They also have other costs for having someone on their payroll, like workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, different liability insurance, and other expenses that they bear when they bring someone on their payroll. And we want to reimburse and compensate for that. So in the past, for general services, we have reimbursed community partners for those wages and administrative costs through the hourly service fee. So if someone was getting a certain hourly rate for internship, they were expected to provide the services and provide wages and the administrative costs out of that. So more recently, we experimented with Priyat's work experience to separate the services from the wages hours. So this is what we did for work experience. So we would authorize for a particular number of service hours under work experience services and a particular number of hours for wages under work experience wages. So we did talk about this in our last form, but just to recap, starting July 1, we're going to use that structure that worked really well for Priyat's work experience, and we're going to apply it to all the on-the-job work and training options for which VRS pays and funds the wages of the individual. So we'll reimburse at what we call wages plus 50%. So that is the individual's wage rate plus 50% of the individual's wage is the amount authorized per hour to the community partner under a wages and service title. So just for an example, I feel like it's helpful to just think about it in a real world type scenario. So say VRS contracts with XYZ community partner to help Joe, who is 42, find a work experience, pay his wages during the work experience, and support Joe through the work experience. So the first line on the authorization that community partners would see, what VRS staff would be authorizing, is for VRS staff to authorize for work experience services, and that is the number of hours for site development, which we'll talk about in a minute, supporting the individual during the experience, and any closure kind of follow-up after the experience. For work experience wages in that example, we would authorize as a separate line on the authorization for the wages of the individual. Let's say Joe will make $16 an hour in his work experience. Just a little math, 50% of $16 is $8. So we have his hourly wage at 16 plus the $8, that equals 24. So the authorization would be $24 per hour to the community partner for work experience wages. Of that, the community partner will pay Joe the $16 per hour and use the $8 per hour to cover those administrative expenses of being the payroll agent. The other change, so that's the wages and services structure. The other change that we are making is regarding site development for on-the-job work and training options. So we talk about site development, we're talking about development of a competitive, integrated on-the-job work and training option. That's what we're talking about when we say site development. In current contracts expiring June 30th, 2022, VRS, we consider the site development to be an indirect cost and ask community partners to build the cost of site development into their hourly direct service time. That hasn't been working so well. And again, we want to increase the amount of opportunities that individuals have for these options. So starting July 1, VRS will reimburse community partners for site development at the hourly service rate. VRS staff will assess and determine the number of hours of site development to authorize, depending on the goal of the service, the career goal, and the individual. Again, more information will be coming for both VRS staff and community partner staff on that in further training. So now I'm going to go through the services and give just a brief description so as to kind of just show how this works with each service. So for on-the-job evaluation, we're talking about an opportunity at a community employment site that's evaluative in nature. The purpose is to provide VRS with an assessment of the suitability of a particular career or occupational area of interest, gain information on work skills, interests, work tolerance, and or identify work supports that may be needed. So on the contracts and what authorizations might look like is on the job services authorized at or on contracts at a certain amount of dollars per hour, and on the job evaluation wages, if the wages are needed to be reimbursed and the partner is willing to do that, it would be authorized at wages plus 50%. Job tryout is a short-term work tryout, which allows an individual the opportunity to demonstrate to an employer that their capacity to effectively perform a job in a job related to their specific employment goal. There must be a job opening at the employer with the possibility of getting hired if the job tryout is successful. So on contracts, depending on the community partner, could be that they have job tryout services at a certain amount per hour and job tryout wages at wages plus 50%. Work experience for general service. So this one is a little bit new because we had work experience for general services on contract starting probably around 2020. And it really was, it started as a pre-ed service. And then we added what I refer to as bridge services for individuals who may have had a birthday and were no longer eligible for pre-eds, or maybe something changed in their ability to do their schooling, or they no longer qualified as pre-eds. So we had the work experience and then we put it on general contracts so that people could finish their work experience. And we found through discussion and some looking into it that this was needed more generally. So we wanted to put a definition to it and put some information around it. So for general services for work experience, we're defining it as a short-term, time-limited work opportunity. It's experiential in nature, and participants may explore careers, understand the nature of work, and or build foundational soft and work skills. It serves as a stepping stone on their career pathway. In addition, it will continue to serve as a carryover service when an individual is eligible for VR services, but no longer eligible for pre-eds. And again, it will appear in contracts in the same way: work experience services, work experience wages. All right, so the pre-eds work experience is what we modeled it on, but it's a little different for pre-eds. So pre-eds work experience is intended for a student to understand the nature of work and build soft skills. For pre-eds work experience, they can be short-term or for intermediate jobs. And again, we can get more into that in further training. Actually, information on pre-eds work experience is already out on our website. So there's lots of resources available there. For internship for general service, it's a time-limited professional learning opportunity that allows a person to gain relevant skills and experience in a particular career field that aligns with their job goal. Again, internship service, internship wages. The pre-eds internship is the same thing, but for a student who would like to gain relevant work skills and experience in a particular career field. So like I said, more to come. We are looking to put together a comprehensive training for community partners and VRS staff, and VRS staff will look for more specific information, including VR policy and guidance updates this summer. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Janine Oyen.
Good morning, everyone. I don't know about you, but after all of that information, I'm just going to go ahead and do a little brain gym, just massage above my eyebrows for a second and just kind of, that was a lot to absorb, but it was all really good information. So now we're going to talk about the 2022 contract pre-ETS updates, or that pre-employment transition services that are for our ages 14 to 21 Minnesotans that are potentially eligible and also eligible for VRS services. So some of the changes that are coming with pre-ETS, starting July 1, for the purpose of group rates for pre-ETS services, a group is now 3 or more students. That's a change from our current contracts that will end June 30th. We had groups defined as 2 or more students, and honestly, the math doesn't work in terms of reimbursing community partners for their time. So a group really is 3 or more students. If you only have 2 students show up for a group, or you only have 2 students assigned, you can charge at the individual rate starting July 1, 2022. We also have made a significant change to pre-employment transition services prep time and a change to how it's compensated. In current contracts, which end June 30th, VRS compensates our community partners that provide those pre-employment transition services for prep time as a billable hourly time. In our new contracts, effective July 1, VRS will no longer reimburse community partners hourly for that prep time. Instead, we're looking to align our services more with general, and I apologize, I just lost my slide. We're aligning with general services. So unless otherwise specified, activities such as prep time, report writing, invoicing are not going to be reimbursed at that hourly service rate. It's going to look more like our general services where that indirect time is not billable. Community partners should look to build the cost of completing those activities into their hourly rate of direct service. And again, in your consultations, you've probably heard from all of us, and Jess, Sarah, and myself, that this is a change that is happening. And so we've had those conversations with our community partners about negotiating a different hourly rate so that all of that indirect service time is included. Prep time was a huge time waster for both our VRS staff and for community partnership staff in terms of billing, invoicing, and reporting. And so this change will hopefully create a much smoother and easier system because we have that alignment between general and pre-employment transition services. We've also made a change to pre-ETS travel, but actually we're taking that back and now there's no change. In current contracts, VRS compensates community partners for their travel expenses related to the provision of services as billable hourly service time. In the contracts effective July 1, 2022, there will now be no change in how VRS authorizes pre-employment transition service travel and transportation expenses. If you've had a consultation with one of your contract liaisons, you'll know that we did talk about the possibility of also taking pre-ETS travel and transportation out of those hourly service hours. But due to our federal funding requirements, we've realized that's not going to be possible at this time. So community partners will continue to report and invoice for pre-ETS travel and transportation expenses within those billable hourly pre-ETS service times, as in our current contracts. And VRS will continue to case note and authorize for the travel and transportation time as part of those billable hourly services. So here we have a visual of a general and pre-ETS services crosswalk. If you want to take just a moment to look at this, I know some individuals are also looking at our interpreters, so I'd like to give everyone a moment just to look at this slide. These are all of the current pre-ETS services and their companion current general service that will not be changing with our new contracts. So as you can see, our pre-ETS introductory work activities oftentimes translate to an informational interview or job shadow. In general services, no change. Pre-ETS work experience services and wages will continue as a general work experience service and wage. Pre-ETS intake for eligible vocational rehab service participants will also continue. Pre-ETS work-based learning coaching will transition to general services job coaching on both current and future contracts. And our pre-ETS workplace readiness training will continue to transition to benefits coaching, employee development services, job seeking skills training, public transportation training, and our independent learning services. On our next slide here, I'd like everyone to take a moment to look over pre-employment transition services, job exploration counseling services. There is a change here in how they will be authorized under general services. So we did reference this in our April 5th, 2022 forum, but starting July 1st, 2022, job exploration counseling is going to be eliminated as a service option under general services. Starting on that July 1st date, those activities will either be authorized as employee development services or job seeking skills training. I'd also like everyone to take a moment to just visually look over the pre-employment transition services post-secondary education counseling slide to look at the change here. Again, we referenced this in our April 5th forum, but starting July 1st, 2022, we are eliminating post-secondary education counseling services as a general service title. Instead, those same activities from pre-ETS post-secondary education counseling services are part of the definition of post-secondary supports in our general service titles. Finally, I'd like you to take a moment to look at the pre-ETS instruction in self-advocacy services and the changes that will happen here in our crosswalk. Currently, we have pre-ETS introduction in self-advocacy services, but starting July 1st, 2022, when you go to authorize under a general service, it will be authorized under independent living services rather than instruction in self-advocacy or some of those peer mentoring and independent living advocacy skills service titles. So all independent living service activities, including that instruction in self-advocacy, will now take place under that one umbrella service title. And Kim, I believe I get to hand it back to you.
Yes, thanks, Janine. All right, so everyone again, deep cleansing breaths. There's one other service title change that we went through in April, but I just wanted to highlight again. So there are changes to the benefits services structure. So we have now two categories. We have benefits coaching services and benefits planning services. And then for benefits coaching, we have two service titles. One is the benefits coaching report, and one is hourly benefits coaching services. And we went into this in depth in April, so I'm not going to read through these, but I just wanted to highlight them one more time. So for benefits planning services, we have two different service titles. One is for benefits summary and analysis report. That's acronym is BS&A report. The other service title is for hourly benefits planning services. And then wanted to just talk a little bit about rate considerations and what VRS looks for and how we set rates with each partner. So in the RFP response and application, community partners are welcome to propose rates to reasonably cover the cost for any services. We do have statewide standardized rates for some services, including the Job Placement and Retention Performance-Based Agreement, or PBA, our Occupational Communication Specialist Service, OCSS differential for that Job Placement PBA, And we also set that wages for any of those on-the-job work and training options at that wages plus 50% that we talked about. So community partners look at their budgets, they look at their expenses, they look at all sorts of things as they determine what they think the rate should be. So VRS leadership is the final decider on any negotiated rates for any service. And the community partnerships program specialists, the folks that you're hearing from today, Jess, Ann, Janine, and Sarah, are the ones that lead those negotiations with community partners regarding rates. The one main thing that we keep in mind as we go through rate negotiations is there are federal regulations for the vocational rehabilitation program that requires any dollar spent from VR program funds has to be reasonable and necessary. And so for the purposes of our rate negotiations, VRS is mandated to look at every rate and for every contracted service and determine if it's reasonable and necessary for the provision of a service to an individual. So that's something that we're always have as our North Star. Some other things that inform the conversation, and this is what we ask of community partners to provide in their rate rationale with their proposal, but we get into more depth in specifics during those consults. We consider other factors such as staff qualifications or resumes. If there's a particular specialization that's supported by education and training. We look at the cost of doing business, especially increases to the cost of doing business, and especially when there's employee compensation increases. We definitely look at service provider gaps geographically and also service need. So we may consider different rates depending on those factors. So a few things I wanted to highlight just for folks to be aware of for some rate changes. The PREITS rate is no longer statewide standardized. It's not at that $75 an hour. As community partners submitted their applications or continue to submit their applications, we'll look at each individually with each partner, but we are considering increases to the cost of doing business. And then you'll also see increases for PREITS rates, also because we asked partners to build prep time as an indirect cost. We ask them to build that into the rate of their hourly service rate. So that increases the cost of the hourly service rate. For general services, for travel and transportation, we have seen an increase, or we have set an increase from $28 per hour to $50 per hour in response, of course, to the rising cost of travel and transport. And then just wanted to set the stage for the next few weeks. So the next few weeks are critical to ensuring that no individual in the VR program has a gap in services after June 30th, 2022. So for community partners, if you haven't submitted your application, submit your application right away. Please stay on top of communication with your community partnerships team program specialists. In some places in the PowerPoint, I refer to it as the CP team for community partnerships. If you haven't had your consult, make sure that you get that on the schedule as soon as possible. And then be watching your email, watch for draft contracts to review. And you may get notes from your community partnership specialist about any issues with processing your contract. Watch for the contract for final signature and return it just as soon as you can. If you can turn that around quickly, that really helps us move it on to the next step. So there are 3 big steps and other little steps after you sign before the contract is executed and effective for July 1. So don't hold on to that, get it back to us as soon as possible. And then for VRS staff, note that more information about how to approach your work in the next 3 weeks is in the works and will be coming to you shortly. And just as one of the pieces in that, the community partnerships team will send regular email communication to VRS staff that includes the status of contracts, when they're executed, when they're ready to go with new contract numbers. So that's something you can expect to come out from the community partnerships team. So Whew, that was a good amount of information, and I appreciate everyone's patience as we waited through that. We're getting some good questions coming in through the Microsoft form, so please submit that. Ask your questions and we'll get to that. So I think we can actually stop screen sharing. Yep, there we go. And Janine Oyen is going to be our lovely host for the Q&A. Janine, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. So we've had some great questions coming in so far, and I'd like to point again to the chat. There is a link for our MS form, and we ask that you continue to submit your questions and comments through there, since you don't have another means of interacting with us in this meeting. We'd love to get to as many of these as we can, and whatever questions we don't answer today, we will post the answers to along with our recording of this presentation. So to start with, I have a couple that are easy-ish to answer, so I'm going to go with those first. Regarding the on-the-job work and training options, has there been any discussion about excluding the wage reimbursement from the limited use vendor budget limit? So for everyone, just a reminder, the LUV or limited use vendor is a community partner that is not CARF accredited. And so we limit those contracts to 2 years with a total work authorization amount of $200,000. And as we've all experienced, sometimes our limited use vendor partners are just really taking referrals and suddenly hit their max budget. So the question is, can we separate out some of those wage reimbursement service titles from that budget limit? Regarding, has there been any discussion? The answer is yes. However, there is not a process or decision made yet about that. So as much as I hate hearing this phrase, I'm going to say it right now, and I ask for everyone's forgiveness. More to come on removing wage reimbursement from the limited use vendor contracts budget limit. Also regarding on-the-job work and training options, how is work experience for general services different from employee development services? So work experiences are an experiential opportunity for one of our participants to be exposed to the world of work if maybe they haven't been before, to gain specific knowledge or skills about a certain area of work. Employee development services are actually a specific training process that gets authorized for, and I'm giving some vague answers, but we can certainly dive deeper into this. I'd also encourage anyone who had the question to go to our Community Partnerships Guide website, where we have definitions for these services that are listed more clearly. But essentially, an employee development services has specific training goals for that individual. And so while it involves some work experience, it's really focused on those training goals. The work experience itself might be much more flexible in terms of what the goal or the outcome is of that work experience. But again, I'd direct you to the chat and to go check out our definitions, because I did not pull them up and read them verbatim to answer that question. Can a community employer become the payroll agent? So always the best practice is for any of these on-the-job work and training options to find an employer paid site. So the answer is yes, absolutely. We really encourage our community partners and our vocational rehab staff to seek internships, to seek evaluation sites, to seek job tryouts, where the employer themselves are willing to be the payroll agent. First of all, that's much better in terms of resume documentation for the individuals we serve. And it also, again, is reasonable from a value standpoint of what vocational rehab services and all of us stand for, which is that all of our individuals we serve bring value to the workplace, even if they're there for a short time for a specific purpose. And so we hope those are paid by community employers. The reality is that sometimes in order to get the service to the individual, though, we do need to provide the funding for those wages as a subsidy. And so we do that again through those wage options that are on all of the service titles. And now we're regarding pre-ETS prep time and travel time. How do we get reimbursed for development of work sites for pre-ETS if we don't get prep time? Again, site development is different from prep time. And so for those work experiences, there still will be an option under pre-ETS to get reimbursed for your site development time. I don't know if that fully answers the question. Feel free to submit a follow-up. And then I'm going to quit answering all these questions and kick it to someone else for once. Can job coaching for pre-ETS be authorized in addition to the, oh wait, that's a different one. I'm going to throw this one to Sarah. It's actually regarding our on-the-job work and training options. Can job coaching be authorized in addition to a job tryout? And in what instances can coaching be authorized? Is there a cap on like work experiences or that type of thing? So Sarah, I'm wondering if you could jump on and speak a little bit to that about job coaching layered on top of job tryout.
Sure. Yes. The answer is that job coaching could be layered on top of job coaching can be layered on top of job tryout. And it's going to follow the same guidance as we use for our placement. Is it a follow-up service, that kind of lighter touch that people are going to need when they're getting that service, or is it going to be intensive training that somebody's going to need? So that will be the difference in whether you just are doing job tryout services and following up with that individual as their job tryout is going, or if they're going to need intensive coaching. Was there a second part, Janine? I'm sorry.
Let me pull it back up, Sarah, and just verify. Yes, there is. Just a moment here. Also, is there a cap on work experience services for the follow-up and support, or could it move between coaching and those work experience services?
Okay. You know, I'm going to say a little bit more to come in our training. We're going to get into a little bit more about our general hours for our services. So I think I'm just going to go with more to come, unfortunately, on that piece, because we want to make sure that when we dig into the on-the-job work and training, training, that we're giving everyone the same message and information.
Janine, are you there?
I am, and
Okay.
I apologize. I have two barking corgis and
Awesome. Do you want me to jump in for a minute?
a blurry but awesome son who is supporting me. So for just a second here. Okay. Moving on to some pre-ETS questions or pre-employment transition questions. Just to be clear, should travel time be invoiced at the same rate as service time? Like is the current practice. For example, if our negotiated rate is $100 an hour, would we invoice for both service time and travel time at that $100 an hour? And the answer is that's correct. There's no change to the practice of authorizing and invoicing for your pre-ETS travel and transportation time. We had discussed having those items be pulled out of service hours, but again, as we shared during the presentation, our federal funder does not allow us to report our pre-ETS spending correctly that way, so we are back to the current practice. So go ahead and authorize at your hourly service rate on your contract. And again, for our VRS staff, you should always have a conversation ahead of time and have that case note in place that indicates how many of those service hours are designated for travel and or transportation. Another pre-ETS question is what exactly is considered a pre-ETS intake? And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but does anyone want to answer that question? I would, yeah, Sarah.
Okay, I'll take that. This is Sarah. And I think the question is trying to differentiate between a pre-ETS intake, and which is for eligible students, and when we use first meeting for potentially eligible students. And so what we have put on contracts, and it's even clearer as we move into July, is if you're providing pre-ETS services, there is a service title that says intakes for potentially eligible students. And so intakes are done at an each. And that is that first meeting that you're having with a student to get services initiated. For potentially eligible students, there are some support services we can't authorize for. And then we just put that first meeting, we want to pay you for still doing that informational gathering, getting services set up, and we call that a first meeting. So it really comes down to whether a student is eligible or potentially eligible to whether there's an intake or a first meeting. And I would say to our partners, if ever in doubt, just clarify with the VR staff that's referring to you whether this is going to be a first meeting or an intake. If it's an intake, then you should see the pre-ETS intake on your authorization specifically.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next question regarding pre-employment transition services is for the group definition. If a student spontaneously doesn't show up and the group of 3 becomes 2, can the community provider bill as the individual rate for the 2? And that is accurate, yes. We know that sometimes you have a group set up of 5 students and it is entirely feasible and possible that 3 of them will not show up. And so you are left with 2 students. At that point, you will invoice for the individual hourly rate for the 2 students that did show up for that date of service. Another question that was included in this same area is, will the hourly rate be reflected as an increase from what providers submitting in the proposal? I'm not certain what that means, but what I would say is our authorizations should always be authorized for at the individual rate. So even if I, as a vocational rehab service professional, am asking you to serve a group of 5 students, each one of those 5 authorizations should be authorized at your individual hourly rate on your contract. For this purpose, we could say $80 an hour. So you should receive 5 authorizations that indicate $80 an hour. If all 5 students show up or 3 or more students show up, you invoice for your group rate of, let's say, $40 an hour. But then that also again allows for the flexibility of what if not enough students show up that day. It also allows for flexibility if you find that one of the students requires individual services rather than group services, and you can be in touch with the referring professional about that change. And then a final piece of this same question was, can the hourly rate be broken into 15-minute increments as most transportation is a half hour? Again, I'm a little unclear, but what I would guess that question is referring to is we do ask that you round up your travel to the closest 15-minute increment. However, that's not how we authorize. If we were to authorize for travel, we typically look at how much time over the space of all the service hours that are authorized are going to be utilized for travel or transportation. But invoicing, yes, if I travel 10 minutes one way and 10 minutes back, and that equals 20 minutes, I would round up to 30 minutes because that's the closest 15-minute increment. So I hope that answers the question on that one. If not, feel free to submit a clarifying follow-up. Will there be a report template offered for pre-ETS services? I'm certain that there will be more training options to come. I know currently there's quite a few resources. If you go out to the pre-ETS resources for community partners, it's separate from where we have our definitions. It's actually under the link for high school students, where it refers to all of our pre-employment transition service links. And hopefully one of my coworkers can pop that into the chat. But there are quite a few resources there on invoicing and reporting that I'd recommend you check out. What is defined as prep time? And what can staff do without the individual present versus what's considered unbillable prep time? So for this answer, I am going to go to Jess Althwaite. Do you mind sharing the answer that you had placed in there?
I'll be completely honest, I'm on the back end copying and pasting, and I didn't even
Okay.
Get your question, Janine. I apologize.
Never mind.
was
I'll kick it over to
Kim.
Kim Babine.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's Kim Babine again. So when we talk about prep time, we are mirroring for pre-ETS what we do in general. So we talk about direct costs and indirect costs. So direct costs are where VRS has reimbursed community partners for the hours of direct service time, meaning person-to-person service time a community partner spends with an individual receiving services. It can be in person or virtual, but that person to person. We think of indirect costs as the cost of activities outside that person to person service time, such as report writing, invoicing, preparation for the service, so prep time. And we ask community partners to build those costs into the hourly direct service rate. So when you think about what's defined as prep time, that's anything you need to do in order to be ready for the service to meet that person, person to person, in person or virtual. What can staff do without the individual present versus what is considered unbillable prep time? So you should do with the individual present what you would do normally, and that's where you're in your conversations with your community partner team liaison, these other folks here on the call, that's where you can discuss a little bit more about how you build that into your hourly service rate. So that the example I like to give is, say you're doing an hour informational interview and your service rate is $75 an hour, it has been. That's a bad example. I should do a pre-ETS example. So pre-ETS job exploration counseling. Your hourly rate has been $75 an hour. Now we're asking you to build that into the rate. So let's just put aside the cost of doing business. Let's only do this piece. So if you think, you know what, it usually takes me this much time to prep for having an individual one-on-one session for job exploration counseling, maybe it takes me an hour to do that prep, and this is the cost and this is how it works out. So then I kind of break that down into the hourly service rate. The other CP specialists can jump in terms of the conversations you've been having with folks, but so it's whether or not you're person to person or doing the things without the person, with the exception of site development at this point for those on the job work and training options.
Thank you, Kim, for jumping in on that. One more question that showed up under our other service title types and changes, but is still related to our pre-ETS service titles. A pre-ETS work experience where wages are paid by the employer is really a job placement. It's not typically time limited, and the same effort is made for securing a job. Will you consider putting a PBA or performance-based agreement like service in the pre-ETS menu of services in the future? So the definition of a pre-employment transition service work experience is slightly different from a general work experience in that we are supporting a short-term or intermediate job goal. Typically, if a student ages 14 to 21 is placed in an actual employer-paid job, it will not be their final career goal, but it will be a stable intermediate job that helps them pay the bills and get work experience while they're looking to forward their advancement or training options. So while I appreciate the question, the answer at this time is for the purpose of serving transition-aged young people, work experiences do cover job placements at employer-paid job sites that aren't necessarily short-term. Again, they're kind of an intermediate work experience or job.
This is Kim. I would say
Yes.
Talk with, if you're a community partner, have the conversation with your pre-ETS rep or your VRS staff. There may be situations where there's some flexibility, but your pre-ETS staff is going to be the one who knows that the best. So that's why we have the work experience in place. And if that doesn't fit the needs of the individual, we'll be looking for what fits the needs of the individual.
Thank you. We've also had a couple questions come in about the internal VRS process around employment plans. I just updated employment plans for all my graduating students to include job exploration general services. And do VR counselors have to update every employment plan for individuals who are currently receiving services that are changing type and title by July 1? The answer to both of these is yes, you will need to update your employment plans. However, they are system-driven amendments. They do not require a signature from the individual or guardian. So it's simply a matter of going, well, I shouldn't say simply. We acknowledge that it's going to be some work and that there will be more information coming out in the next 3 weeks about what needs to happen to accomplish that work. So again, acknowledging it will be a process change and take some time. But again, these will be system-driven amendments. So hopefully you can go through and make those changes and it won't be too time consuming. There's a question about currently we didn't include independent living on our contract because we thought there would be self-advocacy. Can we add it to our contract? Please reach out to your community partnership contract liaison with any changes and do that now, sooner rather than later, as we're beginning to route your new contracts for July 1 through our process. So any changes that you need to make, please reach out to your liaison immediately and discuss making those changes. But it is still possible to make changes to your contracts that will be starting July 1st, 2022. When should we expect service title types and changes to be updated in Workforce One and on SharePoint? We've had a few questions about those. So that's a good question. Kim, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I will say that for VRS staff, those nitty-gritty details of when does that list on SharePoint get updated and when are things changed in Workforce One? We've been working with Laura Cheney and Carrie Marsh on these, so they're aware of them. We just made final decisions, and so they'll be able to move forward after today on those things. So it's just a matter of coordination with Laura and others to get those pieces done. And that's where expect more information to come from Laura or Faz's or others on how to make all these little pieces, not little, all these moving pieces happen.
Okay, I'm going to go back to our on-the-job work and training options because we've had a few new questions come in. Historically, setup or site development was always viewed differently than prep time, but this has been mentioned now for on-the-job work and training options that there's going to be site development allowed. Is the same principle transferable to all services like it had been in the past? So the idea of authorizing for site development time is going to be limited to the on-the-job work and training options. That includes general job tryout, general on-the-job evaluation, general services work experience, and then pre-employment transition services work experience, and internships for both general and pre-employment transition services. It will not be transferable to any other service that's listed in either pre-employment transition services or general services. Hopefully that answers that question. And then an example of site development, what would that look like in the real world? And Sarah, I'm going to call on you once again to discuss these things.
This is Sarah again, and what I will say is that site development is going to be individualized with that referral. So it's going to be if for a service like internship, if site development is needed, like I'm making a referral, I want Janine to find an internship as an accountant, and Janine doesn't have any resources or leads to do that on her own. So site development hours could be authorized to help find that internship that's going to meet Janine's needs. So that would be the site development for internship under internship services. And then once Janine went to start that internship, I could also authorize internship services to follow up, make sure that internship is going well. There are some times that site development may not be authorized if an individual comes in with the resources already. Again, looking at Janine, and Janine needs an internship in accounting, and she has a really great resource, or she has one almost set up. And so then there might not be site development hours, just support hours as Janine is doing her internship. So it's going to be very specific to the individual and their job goal. We know some of our partners have already have some sites that work out really quickly. We know that sometimes our participants or the students come in with the resources or the sites already developed as well. So it will be individualized, but basically if it's needed, is going to be looking at helping that individual find that on the job work and training site that's going to fit their needs.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. This is Janine again. So we had a question again come in about pre-employment transition services and those changes. Now that prep time is built into service time, are partners still going to be required to specifically lay out in the reports what and how prep time was used? The answer is yes, through June 30th, but beginning July 1st, 2022, no, you do not have to document what you did for prep time to prepare for your direct service time with the students. The reason prep time is being removed is to simplify the reporting and invoicing process for our community partners primarily, but then also for our vocational rehab staff. So July 1st, take everything about prep time that you knew and let it go to the wind, because that's exactly why it's being removed. Kim, I'll let you speak more to that.
This is Kim. I just wanted to jump in on that because we know it's a change, but we're excited about it because the whole reason we're doing it is because we knew and we heard you loud and clear that pre-ETS billing and invoicing is so tangled and messy and so time intensive. And so we think by doing this, it will reduce some of that burden. As we've said before, this is not new news. Our federal funder and regulator, the Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA, has very strict rules on how we authorize and report and how it's tied to specific services and other pieces. And so we wanted to find a way for prep time to make it a little easier, but there's always going to be something. We can't make it perfect and super easy because of these other requirements. So this, we hope, is a step in the right direction and one that will be welcome from all of you.
Okay, this is Janine again. I would like some support from one of my coworkers because a clarifying question was asked about pre-ETS work experience services. You just said pre-ETS work experience services can be for intermediate jobs, but work experience general typically cannot be for an intermediate job. What if we start looking for an intermediate job with a pre-ETS student and then they graduate? So maybe if someone else could clarify what I had said, that would be helpful.
This is Kim. So if you have you've started looking for an intermediate job under pre-ETS and then they graduate, I think it's a conversation with the VRS staff to determine what's needed now that they're no longer in pre-ETS. So it's that distinction between kind of that bridge service. It can still be that bridge service, but when we are talking about the definition, we're talking about more for any person, not necessarily someone coming out of pre-ETS. So we can clarify that a little bit more in training, but we'll really be relying on VRS staff to determine the needs of the individual and what service is right for that general service.
Okay, now we're moving into some of the questions about the more general information that you provided towards the end, starting with the contract rate negotiation process. There's a question regarding the performance-based agreement. This rate hasn't changed in over 12 years. What would need to happen What do you need from us to talk about raising the rates for this? It's lagged behind even basic annual increases in cost to staff wages. So if you are one of my community partners, shout out to my Southern Minnesota and Metro peeps, you have heard me say we will start looking at the performance-based agreement as part of our work moving forward over the next couple of years. And that, as a community partnerships team, what is helpful is if you have included a really excellent rationale for why the performance-based agreement should be increased. If you did not include that in your cost detachment proposal, then please email your contract liaison with your thoughts on the performance-based agreement. We are all collecting that information to serve as a starting point for discussion with our VRS co-workers, with our community partner advisory group, the CPC, and other groups to really take a look at the performance-based agreement. Again, it's more to come. I hate saying that, but it is going to be a work in progress. And honestly, we receive so much excellent feedback and knowledge from our community partners. And that anecdotal data, and sometimes some of you are very thorough with even real number data, is so helpful to us to inform where we even start the framework for a discussion, because you're correct, it's been 12 years. So getting a current snapshot of what would be helpful is really important to us. And Kim Babine, I see you off mute, so please take it over.
This is Kim again. So absolutely, we're always open to the discussion, and as part of moving forward, we will be reviewing our services and our general rate structure on a regular basis so that 12 years doesn't necessarily go by without us having taken a dive into the costs around any of these services. One thing that's helpful when you do provide the rate rationale, it is, and again, it can just be an email to your liaison or me. And what's helpful is if you also consider some of the changes that have occurred over the 12 years. So just last year, we took out job coaching as part of one of the requirements of things that needed to be done within that $3,800. So we have layered services, so you can layer that job coaching on. It'd be interesting to hear from you as community partners what the impact of that has been. If there's been no impact, you can tell us that too. And so it's helpful if we make tweaks here and there to the expectations of the PBA, that is reflected in your analysis and your rationale that you sent to us. So you can do that for PBA. We've done it for, that's what you did as part of your application for these services, but it's always helpful to have that data, and especially if things change.
Thank you, Kim. This is Janine again. To the person that submitted the question about the process of approval for services provided, the report and invoice process, all of that, if you could please reach out directly to your community partner liaison for your contract, or if it's a staff person, reach out to any one of the four of us. We are more than happy to help you through invoicing and billing questions, and we can dive a little deeper, or maybe have a meeting with you if there's some more specific questions you want to get answered, okay? I know we've had some past trainings and forums and community partner conversations where we talked also about the invoicing and billing process. So please do go to our Community Partnerships Guide website and check out recordings of our past information on that as well. And then I am going to go back to pre-employment transition services really quickly. Can you please explain the rationale for changing job exploration general to employee development services or job seeking skills training? I feel like the goals of job exploration are very different than the goals of employee development services and job seeking skills training. I can speak to that briefly from the definitions, but then I'd love for Kim Babine or Sarah Sundin or anyone else to pop in and share their thoughts as well. So job exploration counseling at its highest level is defined as working with a student to explore vocational interests like the labor market, in-demand industries and occupations, non-traditional employment options, and look at those career pathways of interest. Under job seeking skills training, exploring labor market is oftentimes part of that process. Exploring career pathways is also part of that process. So what we felt is it's important to remove anything that could be potentially duplicative in our service titles. And in this case, there's those options. There's also times that if you are working more specifically on a specific aspect of training around this exploration, that it would make sense under employee development services. Maybe an option to, okay, now I'm just rambling. So if someone else wants to jump in, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
This is Sarah, and I don't have much more to add. Janine, I think, covered it. What we wanted to do in this contracting cycle is we actually were just trying to avoid what we felt were duplicative services that already were available. And so if there was a way to provide that service under general services, that's why we made those changes. And if you have issues or you aren't sure where that's going to fit in your contract, just reach out to us as liaisons and we can work with you on that.
This is Janine again. I would also say to our VRS staff that you can always reach out to us or speak to your RAM or Alyssa Klein. I'll go ahead and offer her up even if she doesn't want me to. But you know, certainly if you're questioning, well, here with my specific student and circumstance, I'm not sure what I would authorize for or put on the employment plan, please do reach out for support and consultation. It is not limited to job seeking skills training and employee development services. Certainly, there's always room to individualize those crosswalk options as you're moving from a student who's receiving pre-ETS job exploration counseling.
This is Kim. If I could jump in, I just wanted to mention on this change in particular and some of the other service definitions and other pieces that we went through in April. These decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are made with work group. These ones in particular have gone to our VRS policy core team, and leadership makes the final decisions on them. So if you have questions, if it's not feeling right, know that it wasn't just Kim Babine in a room alone making unilateral decisions. And so we can provide more justification or more explanation if you need. Just wanted to let you know about that process.
Thank you. This is Janine again. So a couple questions regarding our request for proposal process. When will the contracts be sent for preview? This is, I believe, regarding if you met with your contract liaison and due to some changes, we didn't yet have your contract drafted for you to view in the meeting. We would be then sending you out the draft to review before, just checking for errors, not signing, before we route it through the process of our internal deed fiscal review. As far as a timeline on that, all I can say is reach out to your individual contract liaison. Stay in close touch with us. We are more than transparent about where we're at in the process, but we aren't going to send out a lot of blanket emails. So regarding your specific contract, I recommend you speak to your liaison about that if you haven't yet seen it. What is the guidance for? Oh, go ahead, Kim.
This is Kim. I'm going to jump in on that one. This is where if you haven't submitted your application, obviously we wouldn't have a draft contract for you to review. And if you haven't had your consult with your contract liaison, then there's nothing to review as well. It's during that consult that you kind of work through the issues to inform the draft contract for preview. So make sure you get those things on the calendar if you haven't, and then again, be in close touch with your liaison.
Another question regarding the request for proposal process. And again, this is always kind of the scary part when we are moving into a new contracting cycle. So we do acknowledge that for both our VRS staff and for our community partners. What is the guidance for individuals who are receiving services such as work experience coaching, work experience wages, job coaching, that can't easily be paused while the contracts are being finalized. How far in advance would we likely know which contracts are not going to be finalized by July 1st? And Kim Babine, I am going to go ahead and let you speak to this. Thank you.
Yes, so as Janine acknowledged, it's crunch time. It's the time when VRS staff are going in to do new, look at things for new authorizations for July 1. Community partners are looking at pieces, and all I can say is we will provide you on the VRS staff with as much information as possible. So what we plan to do is send a regular email update. So look in your inbox from Janine, Sarah, Jess, or Ann with a list of all the community partners, and then the status. So there are some community partners that we have elected not to renew with us. So we want to make sure that folks know that so they can offer a different or go through informed choice with the individual for a different service provider. Got some new ones, and then just the status of that contract. So as they become executed, we've already got some in the process. And so once they become executed, we'll mark that, we'll put the contract number, and then you'll have kind of a running list of which ones. So then kind of every email you can say, oh, there's a provider that doesn't have their contract executed. I know I've got a lot of people with them, so I need to keep a close eye on that one. So we'll know a lot more in a week. We'll know a lot more in 10 days, and we can be having conversations about what the next steps are if things seem to be delayed or there might be a gap.
Thank you, Kim. This is Janine again. I'd like to also add on to that. I'd like to highlight the fact that it will be a running Excel spreadsheet. So you only need to keep the most recent email as a VRS staff member that you have received from the community partnership team. We are hoping that makes it much easier for staff to track the most recent communication that they are receiving from us. And we can thank Jess Southwaite for that brilliant idea. I have a question here that I'm going to look to Chris McVeigh, hopefully, to answer, or one of our regional directors seems like they would be most appropriate. It seems to be coming from a vocational rehab staff person, so that's why I'm going to ask them to tap in on the answer. Does the repeal of the vaccination testing policy for COVID also affect the requirement of vocational rehab services to get temperature checks, read through the legal document, and ultimately how they meet with adults in person?
Chris, are you
okay?
Okay,
Yeah,
I
thank
wanted
you.
to make sure you could unmute. Excuse me.
Yes, I have unmuted. Thank you for that question. As I understand it, if I'm hearing correctly what the question was, is that with the repeal of the on the MMB side, Minnesota Management and Budget, which has been giving state agencies direction around COVID, the vaccination requirements or proof of testing requirements have concluded. We are able to go out and meet with people in person. Our daily requirements for doing the health screening are still there, as are our requirements to be connecting with adults in a general setting when we're meeting with them about just ask and doing a screening there too. So that has not gone away. But what we are encouraging absolutely is that people are getting back into in-person services, meeting with people directly when possible. So if there are questions from that, or if I've not fully hearing the question, I'm willing to respond further.
This is Janine. Thank you, Chris, for jumping in on that. I appreciate your help with that. Some final little clarification questions, and then I believe we have exhausted what's coming into the MS form at this time. Just a reminder that form will remain open for a period of time after the meeting, so feel free to submit any questions that occur to you after you log off today. Can you share the difference between the changes in pre-ETS VR eligible and pre-ETS non-eligible? Are there any changes? Again, the Terminology we use is eligible pre-employment transition services students and potentially eligible, because we serve students who could be eligible but for vocational rehab services, but are currently able to just receive kind of the higher level, lighter touch pre-employment transition services that may help them to independently move forward on their path of career and training options without having to apply for the complete vocational rehab services program. There are no changes to how potentially eligible students sign up or eligible students apply. And there's no changes in terms of our current marketing and definition of what those two different terms mean. Another little clearer up question is, will authorizations be reissued on July 1st that have these new service titles on them? And the answer is yes. All authorizations for all services will need to be reauthorized or newly authorized beginning July 1st, 2022, because all of the contract numbers for our community partners' contracts with vocational rehab services are changing. So you as a community partner will see a batch of new authorizations. They might be reauthorizing your performance-based agreement milestones, or they will be a new hourly service authorization that begins July 1st. Please, we ask community partners and vocational rehab staff to be in good communication about requests for hours that will begin July 1, 2022. We also ask that there's ongoing good communication about what hours from the previous contract can be closed out, invoiced, billed, reported on, so that we can clear out that last fiscal year funding. But again, as community partners, you will see all new authorizations that are dated to start July 1st, 2022, because we have a brand new contract in place with a new number and new funding encumbered and attached to it. And then I'm just quickly scanning to make sure we didn't get any additional questions. We have some great feedback about future forum topics, so that's terrific. One other note, I know some of you had heard that today we would be providing a training from Outfront Minnesota on LGBTQIA+ 101, kind of an introductory training that would further our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. We do hope to reschedule that at some point, but again, we had so much important information to share today about service titles and these contracts that we understand this was a much more timely topic. So keep your eyes peeled for hopefully more information on when we can offer that training that will be accessible to all of our community partners and our internal VRS staff. Kim, I believe you're on wrap up today, so I'll kick it back to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Janine, for being our master of ceremonies. So thank you to everyone who joined today. Again, there's no great way to share a lot of information at one time. So at first it was an email and now it's a presentation. We'll get the information out to you in a couple of different ways. And we're here to support you. We're all both community partners and VRS staff. Everyone is working towards the goal of making sure services to individuals are strong and continue, and there's no gap. So we're in this together, and we'll continue working together over the coming weeks to make sure we have a smooth transition from June 30th to July 1. So if you have any questions, any follow-up, again, the question form has a space for feedback for this forum and future forums. I'm especially interested in any feedback that we are especially interested in, any feedback around accessibility. We're learning, we're trying to do more to be responsive to all of our individuals that attend these, but there's always more to learn. So if there's things that we can be doing differently, please let us know. And of course, reach out to any of us with any questions or comments or follow-up. So thanks everybody. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.